I was sitting in my car, parked in the lot of a grocery store in Boston, the fluorescent hum of the building casting a sickly glow on the asphalt. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. My phone buzzed, and I almost dropped it. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hell, of not sleeping, of replaying every single moment of my life, wondering. And then there it was. The email. I opened the attachment, my thumb shaking so badly I almost missed the file. And the first line it hit me like a physical blow. 0% probability of paternity, the world tilted. I mean, it literally felt like the concrete beneath my tires just gave way. I kept rereading it, staring at those words. 0% probability of paternity, like maybe there was fine print I was missing, some asterisk that would explain how 9 years of my life, 9 years of being a dad, could just vanish. For the first hour, maybe more, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness. Just this profound, crushing stupidity. Like I was the biggest fool who had ever lived, and everyone else had known, and they'd all been quietly laughing behind my back for almost a decade. I thought about every birthday party I'd shown up to with gifts, every school pickup where I'd rearranged my work schedule, every late night trying to be present, to be the dad Leo deserved. And none of it had been real. Not in the way I thought. How did I even get here? It started simply enough. For 9 years, I had wired money every single month to my ex-wife, Jessica, without fail. Like clockwork. I showed up for birthday parties, even when it felt like I was actively unwelcome. I picked Leo up from school when she had, let's just say, other priorities. And I never, not once, complained about the system that left me budgeting every single dollar while she seemed to live a comfortable life, funded in large part by me. I'm not saying I was father of the year. I had my faults. But I was there. I was consistent. And I made sure Leo never, ever felt like a burden. Jessica, on the other hand, had a narrative. I was the bad guy in our divorce. The one who abandoned his family. What she conveniently left out of that story were the 3 infidelities I discovered during our marriage, the financial chaos she created, or the weekends she'd disappear, only to return smelling of someone else's cologne. I didn't fight her in court back then. I wanted stability for Leo. I didn't argue primary custody because I believed a child needed his mom. And I didn't push back on the child support amount, even though it meant I was eating ramen 4 nights a week. I just paid. Kept my head down. And tried to be the best dad I could be, even as she subtly undermined me at every turn. Then, a few months ago, a letter arrived from Jessica's lawyer. A demand for a 30% increase in child support. The reasoning? Inflation, rising costs, and my increased salary. It's true, I'd been promoted twice in the last 5 years. I work long hours as a financial manager. Yeah, I make more than I did when Leo was a baby, but I'm not exactly rolling in it. I still live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Boston, drive a car with 160,000 miles, and meticulously budget every single dollar, because half my paycheck vanishes on the first of the month. Jessica? She hadn't held a steady job in 3 years, though she picked up odd gigs for quick cash. Yet her social media was a highlight reel of spa days and weekend getaways. And every time I picked up Leo, he was wearing shoes that were practically falling apart, while she was carrying a brand new handbag. It became clear the money I was sending wasn't going where it was supposed to. When her lawyer started talking about financial responsibility and the child's needs, something inside me just snapped. I didn't hire a lawyer immediately. I just asked for an audit. A simple breakdown of where the money was going. Receipts for Leo's expenses. Proof that the increase was genuinely necessary. And you'd think I'd asked her to commit some grand offense. My phone blew up. Texts from Jessica calling me controlling, accusing me of trying to hurt her, saying I was weaponizing money against our son. When I didn't back down, she started posting vague, dramatic messages on social media about deadbeat dads and men who manipulated the legal process. My phone lit up with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, mutual friends suddenly full of strong opinions, even coworkers asking if everything was okay. She was building a narrative where I was the villain, and she was the helpless victim. I wanted to scream, to post my side of the story, but I knew it would just make things worse. So, I stayed quiet. We had a meeting, just the two of us, at a quiet cafe in Cambridge. I brought a folder. 9 years of payment records. Every bank statement, every receipt. Proof that I'd never been late, never been negligent. I slid it across the table. I told her I wasn't trying to hurt her, I just wanted transparency. She looked at me like I'd spit in her face. She didn't open the folder. Didn't even glance at it. She just stared, her face cold, and said I'd always been like this, always needing to be right, always needing to control everything. My hands were shaking under the table. I wasn't angry yet. Just so unbelievably exhausted. Tired of being the bad guy. Tired of paying for a life I wasn't part of. Tired of pretending that everything she did during our marriage didn't matter anymore. And that's when I said it. The thing I'd been holding back for almost a decade. The question that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind since the day I found out about her first affair. After everything you did during our marriage, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, after all the lies, I think I deserve to know the truth. I need a DNA test. The words landed like a bomb. Jessica stared at me, uncomprehending, then she let out this sharp, bitter laugh. Are you seriously going to punish our son because you can't let go of the past? She spat. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone, I just wanted to know. She shot up so fast her chair scraped across the floor. You monster, she yelled, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. Then she walked out, leaving me sitting there with my folder of useless receipts and a question I couldn't take back. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. When she finally responded, it was through her lawyer. She'd agreed to the DNA test, on the condition that I continue paying child support and cover all associated costs. I agreed. What choice did I have? And part of me, the part that had been there for every scraped knee and every bedtime story, truly believed it would come back positive. This whole nightmare would be over. The test was at a lab in downtown Boston. Jessica brought Leo in without a word to me. I watched my son swab the inside of his cheek, completely oblivious, while his mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was destroying his life. When the nurse handed me my own swab, I felt like the worst person in the world. During those 2 weeks waiting for the results, I told myself it didn't matter what the test said. That I'd still be Leo's dad, that biology wasn't everything. But deep down, I knew if it came back negative, everything would change. After the results, for 3 days, I couldn't tell anyone. I went to work, sat through meetings. Answered emails, pretending everything was fine. But my mind was replaying every memory I had of Leo as a baby, looking for signs I'd missed. I started seeing things that weren't there. Or maybe they'd always been there, and I just ignored them. How Leo had her eyes, her laugh, but nothing that looked like me. How, during the pregnancy, Jessica had been strange about doctor's appointments, always going alone, always brushing off my questions. Finally, I called my brother. He went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he spoke, his voice was shaking. He asked what I was planning to do. I had no idea. Jessica never called or texted after the test. Nothing. That told me everything I needed to know. She'd known. Maybe not for certain, but she'd known it was possible. And she'd spent 9 years betting I'd never ask. That I'd just keep paying, keep playing dad, and never question the story she'd sold me. Then, an email from her lawyer, still pushing for the child support increase, as if nothing had changed. As if the DNA test was just a minor inconvenience. It talked about setting aside our differences for Leo's sake and doing the right thing. I almost threw my laptop across the room. I forwarded it to a family lawyer named Sarah, who had excellent reviews. We met, and she looked at the DNA results for maybe 10 seconds before looking up at me. She laid out my options: petition to terminate child support, sue for repayment, fight for custody, or walk away. I told her I didn't want to hurt Leo. He didn't ask for any of this. She nodded. She'd heard it 1,000 times. She said I needed to think about myself, too, because Jessica wouldn't stop demanding money just because the truth was out. I signed the paperwork that day, a petition to terminate child support and a request for an emergency hearing. Sarah filed it immediately. And that's when Jessica started her campaign. A vicious, calculated campaign designed to destroy me. She posted on every social media platform she had. Long, emotional posts about how I was abandoning a child I'd raised for 9 years, how I was using DNA as an excuse to escape my responsibilities, how I was traumatizing Leo by rejecting him over something he couldn't control. She never mentioned her affairs. Never mentioned the lies. She just painted herself as a struggling single mom and me as a monster who decided biology mattered more than love. My phone exploded. People I barely knew telling me I was disgusting. Coworkers asking if the rumors were true. Even my own mother calling, asking what I was thinking. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to post the DNA results, the affair timeline, every piece of evidence that showed who Jessica really was. But Sarah told me not to. Anything I said publicly could be used against me in court. So, I watched my reputation burn while Jessica played the victim. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. And in that time, Jessica did something I didn't expect. She named the biological father. A guy named Mark, who'd worked with her at an insurance company back when Leo was conceived. She did it through her lawyer, in a formal statement that basically threw him under the bus while still trying to keep my wallet open. I'd never heard of Mark. Didn't know what he looked like or if he even knew Leo existed. But apparently, Jessica had kept in touch with him. Now she was dragging him into this mess, too. Sarah called me. Things just got more complicated, she said. Now there were 3 parties involved. Me, trying to get out. Jessica, trying to keep the money flowing. And Mark, who might not even know he had a child. I looked Mark up on social media. Found his profile in about 5 minutes. Spent an hour scrolling through photos of his life. Married, 2 kids of his own, sales manager. Looked happy, in that basic suburban dad way. I wondered if he had any idea what was coming. Part of me wanted to message him, to warn him. But Sarah had made it clear, no contact with anyone involved in the case. 2 days later, Mark's lawyer filed a motion demanding his own DNA test. Which meant he either didn't know or didn't believe Jessica. Suddenly, 2 legal battles were happening at once. Me, trying to get out. Mark, trying to figure out if he was in. The worst part wasn't the court dates or the lawyers or even the money I was spending. The worst part was Leo. Jessica had told him some version of the story. I don't know what exactly, but when I showed up for my next scheduled visitation, he looked at me differently. Like I was a stranger. Like I'd done something wrong. He barely talked during the whole visit. Just sat on my couch playing games on his tablet. When I tried to explain that I still cared about him, that none of this was his fault, he just shrugged. He said his mom told him I didn't want to be his dad anymore. I didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to tell a 9-year-old his mom had lied about everything. So, I just told him it wasn't true and left it at that. But I could see he didn't believe me. Sarah filed the lawsuit the following week, not just against Jessica, but a formal petition for fraud and repayment of child support. She warned me it was going to get ugly. She said Jessica would fight back, use every trick in the book, try to make me look like the villain. And she was right. 2 days after the filing, Jessica's lawyer submitted evidence that I'd allegedly known about her affair with Mark during the marriage and had accepted Leo as mine anyway. The evidence was a series of old text messages between me and Jessica, where I'd said things about wanting us to work, believing Leo needed both of us. They were twisting my words to make it sound like I'd known all along and had waived my right to contest paternity. I read through those messages and felt sick. They were real. I had said those things, but not because I knew Leo wasn't mine. I'd said them because I was trying to save a marriage that was already dead. The hearing was scheduled for early November. 2 separate cases now running parallel. Mine against Jessica, and the state's case to establish Mark as the legal father. Sarah said, depending on how things went, this could drag on for months, even years. I asked her what my chances were, and she gave me a look that told me she'd seen cases like mine go both ways. Some judges saw this as fraud. Others saw it as a man trying to escape responsibility. We needed to be prepared for anything. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, thinking about how I'd spent 9 years building a life that wasn't real, and how the only way forward was to tear it all down. Jessica called me directly for the first time in weeks. When I answered, she asked if I was really going to destroy everything. I told her she'd already done that. She hung up. The first hearing happened on a cold morning in early November. The sky was gray, everything felt heavy. I sat in that courtroom watching Jessica's lawyer paint me as a man who'd raised a child for 9 years and was now abandoning him over a piece of paper. They had photos of me and Leo at birthday parties, screenshots of texts where I'd called him my son, even a Father's Day card he'd made me in 2nd grade. They displayed it all like evidence of some kind of contract I'd signed in blood. Jessica sat at her table, looking devastated, dabbing her eyes with tissues, playing the part of the heartbroken mother protecting her child from a monster. I wanted to stand up and scream that she'd lied about everything. But Sarah squeezed my arm and whispered that I needed to stay calm. Judge Adams, an older woman who looked like she'd seen every trick in the book, listened to both sides without much expression. When Jessica's lawyer finished his performance about the importance of emotional bonds over biology, Judge Adams asked one simple question that cut through all the noise. She asked if Jessica had known or suspected during the marriage that the child might not be mine. Jessica's lawyer stumbled, trying to avoid a direct answer, talking about the complexities of relationships and the fog of memory. I watched Judge Adams' expression shift from neutral to deeply skeptical in about 5 seconds. Sarah stood up and presented the DNA results, the timeline of Jessica's affair with Mark, and the fact that Jessica had never once suggested a paternity test herself, despite knowing about the affair, despite having every opportunity to come clean during the divorce proceedings 9 years ago. She brought up the child support modification request that had triggered this whole mess, pointing out that Jessica had demanded more money while simultaneously hiding information that would have made me not legally responsible for any payments at all. She argued this was textbook fraud. Jessica's lawyer tried to redirect, claiming I'd implicitly accepted paternity by being involved in Leo's life. But Sarah was ready with case law, showing that fraud undermines everything. You can't enforce an obligation based on a lie. Judge Adams called for a recess and said she'd issue a ruling within 2 weeks. As I walked out, Jessica tried to approach me in the hallway, but her lawyer pulled her back. I just kept walking. I didn't hear anything for 10 days. I lived in this weird limbo, not knowing if I was still Leo's father in the eyes of the law or if I was about to be released from a 9-year sentence I'd never deserved. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, Sarah called. She told me to sit down. Judge Adams had ruled in my favor. Terminated my child support obligation, effective in 30 days pending any appeals. And ordered Jessica to provide full financial documentation for a separate hearing about repayment of past support. Sarah said it was a significant win. Judges rarely went this far in paternity fraud cases. But she warned me the fight wasn't over. Jessica could appeal, and the repayment case was going to be brutal. I asked what happened with Mark. Sarah said his DNA test had come back positive. He was Leo's biological father, and the state was now pursuing him for future child support, while my case against Jessica for repayment moved forward separately. That's when Jessica made her biggest mistake. The kind of mistake that turns a civil case into a criminal investigation. About a month after the ruling, I got a notification from my bank. Unusual activity on an old joint account I'd set up during our marriage for emergencies. One that was supposed to have been closed during the divorce, but had slipped through the cracks. Someone had charged $8,000 to it over 3 days. Cash advances and transfers. I immediately thought of Jessica. Pulled up the account history online. She'd been using it sporadically for months, small charges I'd never noticed. But now she'd gone big. Probably panicking about losing child support. I reported it to the bank, filed a fraud claim, and called Sarah. She told me this was potentially identity theft and that I should file a police report immediately. I went to the station, gave them everything. The account statements, the timeline, proof that I'd never authorized the charges. The officer looked at me with a mix of pity and disbelief. Over the next month, the bank's fraud department confirmed that the signatures on the cash advance slips didn't match mine. The IP address for the online transfers traced back to Jessica's apartment. They were referring the case for prosecution. Sarah called me. Jessica had just made my repayment case 10 times easier. Now it wasn't just about child support fraud. It was about financial fraud, forgery, and theft. The final hearing was scheduled for mid-December. By that point, Jessica's world was collapsing in real time. She'd lost her part-time job after the fraud investigation became public. Mark's wife had filed for divorce after finding out about Leo. And the legal system was now pursuing Mark for child support while simultaneously investigating Jessica for multiple counts of fraud. I showed up to court with Sarah. Jessica showed up with a public defender. Her original lawyer had dropped her. She looked completely different from the confident woman who'd demanded more money just 7 months earlier. Judge Adams reviewed everything. The original paternity fraud, the account theft, the forged documents, and the pattern of deception that had gone on for nearly a decade. When Jessica's public defender tried to argue she'd been acting out of desperation as a single mother, Judge Adams cut him off. Desperation, she said, doesn't justify fraud. The ruling came down hard. Jessica was ordered to repay $60,000 in child support I'd paid over 9 years. She was placed on probation for the financial fraud, and she lost primary custody of Leo, pending a full evaluation. The judge said Leo would be placed temporarily with Jessica's parents under court supervision while custody arrangements between Jessica and Mark were being determined. And that I would have the option to pursue visitation if I wanted to maintain a relationship with the child I'd raised. I sat there, listening to all of this, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no victory. Just this overwhelming exhaustion that comes from watching something you built get demolished piece by piece. Jessica looked at me as they read the custody decision. Her face was blank. Like she'd finally run out of performances. I wondered if she'd ever actually cared about Leo, or if he'd just been a paycheck to her all along. I walked out of that courthouse in mid-December, the winter air biting at my face. Sarah told me the repayment would probably take years. Jessica would likely declare bankruptcy. I'd probably never see most of that money. But at least the truth was finally on record. I thanked her, paid her final invoice, and drove home to my 1-bedroom apartment, where I'd been living like a broke college student for 9 years while funding someone else's lie. That night, I sat on my couch and thought about Leo. About whether I should pursue visitation. About whether it would hurt him more, or help him, to have me in his life after everything that had happened. I realized I didn't have an answer. I didn't destroy my son's life. I stopped letting a lie fund itself. And if that makes me a monster in some people's eyes, I can live with that. Leo is in therapy now. Mark is trying to figure out how to be a father to a 9-year-old he didn't know existed. And Jessica is living with her parents, dealing with probation and bankruptcy. I loved a child who wasn't mine by blood. I showed up for him when I thought he was mine. I did everything a father is supposed to do. What broke everything wasn't the DNA. It was the moment she demanded more money and thought the truth wouldn't matter. Sometimes, doesn't it feel like deception is only sustained until greed gets in the way?